union's still busted.
Finish it later.
In the first half of episode 1, who we later find out to be Ekko, is referred to as Little Man.
It was a tip from Little Man.
Little Man?
Not only is this indicative of Arcane's use of the third person introduction, but prompts the question, who is Little Man, thus making us try to form a mental image of the potential character. Perhaps Little Man is an ironic code name, i.e. Little Man isn't actually little, but quite the opposite. This is a crackpot theory of mine, but I feel like the writers wanted to do a little quick bait and switch, making us think that Benzo was Little Man. Beforehand, Powder gives up Little Man as the informant for the heist. Since he doesn't press further, it's clear that Vander knows who Little Man is. Vander goes on to say how he's going to have a chat with Little Man.
I'm gonna have a little word with your informant.
Fast forward and Vander is at Benzo's talking to the titular owner. At this point, it's fair for the audience to assume that Benzo is Little Man and that their code name was indeed ironic. However, we can see that Ekko is also in the room and is promptly kicked out by Benzo so he and Vander can talk. Nonchalantly, Clagger says, it was not a code name. It was a nickname for a young child. Now, I don't have much to say about Ekko in this first scene. We know his first lines and him being introduced fixing the clock are a nod to his in-game abilities and his foreshadowing for season 2. Him fixing the clock also shows that he's good at gadgetry, only enforced by the contraption he has on top of Benzo's to eavesdrop into the conversation. He looks up to Vi much like Powder because of the fine technique she shows him, and he's street smart on the fact that he scammed Jayce out of double the money he thinks the junk was initially worth.
Bunch of stuff Benzo only keeps there for display. He paid in gold and didn't even haggle. I charged him double price. Sucker.
Not to mention that he's really good at reconnaissance based on the fact that he did follow Jayce back to the apartment and has gadgets to eavesdrop on private conversations. At this point, Ekko, while a key character later, is more used as a means to drive the story forward. How do they know about Jayce's apartment? Ekko told them. How do they escape the enforcers from the lanes? Ekko helps them at the last minute. How does Vi know about Vander's deal with the enforcers? Ekko was eavesdropping in the first scene we saw him in. And how does Vi escape the basement of Benzo's shop and knows where to find Vander? Ekko sees the whole thing. As a result, while Ekko does deliver a great first impression to become one of the more universally liked characters, his introduction understandably lacks delving into his own character and goals, mostly because said goal hasn't really come into fruition yet.
You were supposed to follow them and not interfere.
I'm going to do these at the same time because in their first scenes at the end of episode 1 shows them in the kind of same light, and their scenes in episode 2 only exist to reinforce our first impressions. Whilst not named, Vander indirectly calls Silco worse than the enforcers whilst tensing his right arm, giving audiences the information that there are other and worse nefarious forces than the enforcers out there, with our point of references at this point of the enforcers being from the opening and markers as just a few moments later. The close-up and tensing of the arm signifies that whoever Vander is referring to, he has a more personal connection to them. We are first introduced to Silco chastising Deckard, who bit off more than he can chew on his mission, immediately highlighting Silco as the mastermind. He's also established as an opportunist who can adapt on the fly, as when Silco finds out that Vander's children were the ones responsible for the explosion in Piltover, he takes the opportunity to enact his plan sooner than expected. Following up from Deckard, we see that Silco and the Doctor are testing a new concoction. Now, in writing there's a technique called Save the Cat. Quite simply, it's a quick hand method to establish whether a character is a good guy or a bad guy by having them do a good deed, i.e. save a cat. Naturally, the opposite of save the cat to establish a bad guy would be kill the cat. Arcane takes this one step further to achieve the bad guy status for Silco and the Doctor with a technique called Royd the Rat, Kill the Cat. Essentially, at this point in the story, the writers want you to know that these guys are the antagonists of this story, and while in this first act, Silco and Singed are depicted as your run-of-the-mill villains, this early establishment of their characters works well, especially in Silco's case, to be subverted later on when we are adding layers to their characters.
A little danger is worth the risk, don't you think?
Surprise, surprise! Much like Vander and Ekko, we get an idea of Jayce's character through other characters. Vi deducts that he's an inventor, and Milo says he was born lucky.
Simple. Just get born lucky.
Immediately giving us the impression that Jayce is smart and privileged, getting what he has through having better circumstances than those in the Undercity. When Ekko talks about Jayce from serving him at the store, he gives us a first-person perspective on this person yet to be seen. He enforces the idea that Jayce is privileged.
This weirdo came into the shop, bought a whole bunch of stuff Benzo only keeps there for display. He paid in gold and didn't even haggle.
Showing how he can easily afford what Benzo's shop was offering. This is also followed up by
I charged him double price. Sucker.
Highlighting Jayce's flaw of not only lacking in street smarts but in business smarts when it comes to making deals, something the next two acts tackle. It's also key to note that didn't even haggle, comes back into play in Act 3, but rather be a flaw for Jayce, it becomes one of his strengths in the negotiations with Silco, almost bringing a more peaceful end to the current conflict in the cities. When we finally meet Jayce in the opening of episode 2, unsurprisingly we do get confirmation that Jayce is indeed privileged, having his research funded by Caitlyn's parents.
Careful, that's your parents' money you're dropping.
Despite this, we are also given some new information. His opening lines give us his belief that his work is worth any risks, enforced by the next scene when we discover that Jayce's experiments on magic are illegal in Piltover. Jayce's introduction also gives us a flashback into the moment that kickstarted his dream of bringing magic to the world, showing how magic saved his life. It's this act of kindness executed by magic that Jayce wants to replicate and share his joy with. What's more, showing that this was an event from his childhood informs the audience of his pure and well-meaning intentions, as children and childhood are commonly symbolic of simplicity, purity and wonder.